I never thought the last day of my life would start like any other. The sun had just risen, casting a soft glow through my bedroom window. I remember the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, the kind of ordinary moment that now feels like a lifetime away. I kissed my wife on the forehead as she slept, grabbed my briefcase and headed out the door, completely unaware that I would never return the same. It was a Wednesday. I was on my way to work, driving the same familiar road I'd taken for over a decade. My mind was racing with deadlines, emails, and errands. I barely noticed the red light until it was too late. The crash happened in an instant. Metal twisted, glass shattered. My body was thrown forward, restrained only by the seatbelt. But then, everything stopped. Time seemed to pause. I felt no pain, just stillness, and then nothing. Or at least, that's what I thought. The next thing I remember is hovering above the scene. I was watching myself, my body, slumped behind the wheel. People were screaming, running toward the wreck. A woman was shouting for someone to call 911. Another man was kneeling beside the car, trying to check my pulse. But none of it felt real. It was like watching a movie with the sound turned down. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't panicking. I just observed. Then I felt it. A gentle tug, like a current pulling me upward. I turned and suddenly the world below began to blur, as if it no longer needed my attention. I was rising, drawn by something I couldn't see but instinctively trusted. I should have felt peace. I had heard so many stories of light, warmth, and angelic choirs, but that's not where I was going. Instead of rising into light, I was being drawn sideways, downward. The colors around me dimmed. The air grew heavy. I sensed something was off, but I couldn't stop the movement. I wasn't flying anymore. I was being pulled, slowly, steadily, deeper into something I couldn't name. And that's when the fear began. The light faded completely, replaced by a darkness so thick it felt alive. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was the presence of something else, something cold, something ancient. I could hear whispers far off at first, like voices carried on the wind, but they grew louder, closer, more desperate. My mind screamed that this couldn't be happening. I was a good person. I believed in God. I went to church, maybe not every Sunday, but I prayed, I helped others. Why was I going this way? I tried to fight it, to will myself upward, back toward the light. But the pull only grew stronger. And then I saw them. Shadows moving in the distance, contorted figures crying out in agony. I still wasn't fully there yet, just on the edge of something I couldn't explain. A waiting room to a place I never believed I'd see. And somehow deep inside I knew I was being shown something. This wasn't a punishment, it was a revelation, a warning. Just before I crossed fully into that realm, I felt one final jolt, a searing pain in my chest, defibrillators, EMTs, the hospital. I was being revived. But what I saw, what I would soon be shown, had already begun to etch itself into my soul. I didn't die just to come back. I died to tell you what's on the other side, and who I saw there. When I came back to my body, if you can even call it that, I was only half aware of the hospital around me. Beeping monitors, muffled voices, the sterile smell of antiseptic. They were there, but distant, like echoes through water. My body was in that room, but my soul, it hadn't fully returned yet. A part of me was still standing on the threshold of something far greater and far darker than anything I could have imagined. That place I had glimpsed, it lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. Not a demon, not a ghost, but a truth too heavy for words, a truth that made everything I once believed feel paper thin. I had been given a glimpse into something beyond the veil, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to understand it. In the days that followed, while my body recovered from the accident, I found myself slipping in and out of this reality. One moment I was in a hospital bed, hearing my wife pray softly at my side. The next I was drifting somewhere between here and there, back into the place where light and shadow battled for dominance. That's when it happened again. It was early morning. I had dozed off, but what I experienced wasn't a dream. I found myself standing in a vast, dim expanse. There was no ground beneath my feet, just a void, endless and hollow. The air, if you could call it that, was thick with sorrow. Not fear, not pain, but a kind of sadness that felt eternal. Like every regret, every broken promise, every unspoken apology had taken shape and hung in the atmosphere like fog. And then I heard it, a distant sound like sobbing. multiplied 1,000 times over. I wasn't alone. Shapes began to emerge around me. Shadows. People, or what was left of them. Some crouched, rocking in silent misery. Others screamed, not with words, but with expressions twisted in anguish. What chilled me most was the silence. No fire, no brimstone, just the hollow absence of peace, a place completely void of love. And that's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a mistake. My mind couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. She was someone I had admired deeply in life, a woman of grace, kindness, charity. She had devoted her life to helping the poor, counseling the grieving, even leading church prayer groups. She had passed years ago, celebrated and mourned by many. Yet here she was, in this place, curled into herself as if trying to disappear. I stepped closer, not walking, but somehow moving toward her by thought alone. "Why are you here?" I asked, but no sound came from my mouth. It was as if the question formed in my spirit. Her eyes met mine, and I will never forget what I saw in them. Not fear, not hatred, but deep, soul-crushing regret. She didn't speak, but somehow her truth was transferred to me. She had lived a life of good deeds, yes, but somewhere beneath the surface, her actions had been driven by pride. She never truly forgave herself or others. Her kindness had been a mask for a heart that held on to judgment. On the outside, a saint, but inside, chained by unspoken pain. I don't know how I knew all this. There were no words, just knowledge, instant, undeniable. That's when I realized this place wasn't about punishment. It was about truth, unfiltered, unbearable truth. There were others, people I knew from childhood. A teacher, an old neighbor, even a man from my church who used to greet everyone with a smile every Sunday. Each one surprised me, and each one taught me something about what truly matters after we die. We can't hide our hearts, not there. We can't pretend. I wanted to help them, to reach out, to lift them up, to say something, anything that could break the silence, but I couldn't. This wasn't a place where you could fix things. It was a place of consequence, of reflection, and for some of waiting for something they didn't even know they still needed. Suddenly I was yanked backward, fast, like a current had caught me by the chest. The shadows, the souls, the sadness, all fell away as I was pulled back through the void. And then I woke up, gasping in my hospital bed, tears streaming down my face. I knew then, without a doubt, I had been somewhere real, and I hadn't seen the last of it yet. If this story is touching your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone. Your story matters too. I had always heard the stories about the tunnel of light, about the warm presence waiting on the other side, about relatives long gone, arms wide open, ready to welcome the newly departed. It's what I expected, what I wanted, what I prayed for. But that's not what came for me. The night after my second out-of-body episode, I drifted into a sleep that felt more like slipping through a crack in reality. One moment, I was laying in the hospital bed, feeling the weight of the blankets on my chest. The next, I was standing, no longer broken, no longer in pain, at the edge of something vast and dark. Before me stretched a tunnel, but it wasn't the radiant passage I had imagined. There was no warm glow beckoning me forward, no soft music or sense of peace. Instead, the tunnel pulsed with a heavy grey fog that seemed to breathe. It twisted in unnatural ways, as if it were alive, aware that I was there. I hesitated. Every instinct inside me told me not to go, but something beyond instinct compelled me to step forward, as if whatever force had allowed me to see what I had seen before wasn't done with me yet. My foot moved, and the moment I crossed the threshold, the world behind me dissolved. Inside, the tunnel was narrow, constricting. The walls seemed to close in, yet I never touched them. I couldn't tell if I was walking or floating, but I was definitely moving. Slowly, purposefully, into the unknown. The silence was maddening. I strained to hear something, anything, but there were no footsteps, no echoes, just the distant sound of what could only be described as aching. Not cries, not screams, but a low, continuous murmur of souls too tired to scream anymore. I wasn't afraid in the way I expected to be. I was overwhelmed, humbled. Every memory of every mistake I had ever made began to resurface, not just as thoughts, but as full, visceral relivings. I felt the sting of my sharp words, the weight of my indifference, the selfishness hidden in moments I thought were innocent. It was as though the tunnel wasn't just a place, it was a mirror. And then I began to sense the others. They weren't beside me, not yet, but I could feel them. Ahead, behind, all around me. Not bodies, not visible shapes, just presence. Heavy, regretful. Some were aware. Others seemed lost in loops of memory, replaying the worst moments of their lives in endless repetition. One in particular caught my attention. I don't know how I became aware of him. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't even moving, but I felt his soul pressing against mine. A man, older, alone. His thoughts flooded into me, like waves of unbearable sorrow. He had taken his own life, years ago, left behind children, a wife, and a note filled with apologies. But here in this place, none of it eased his pain. He wasn't being punished, he was simply reliving the moment, over and over, not the act itself, but the anguish that led him to it, the weight of his hopelessness, the crushing silence of feeling unseen. And I realized, this tunnel, this place, it wasn't hell in the way the world imagines it, with flames and devils and eternal torment. It was something far worse. It was truth, stripped bare. There was no hiding in this place. No rationalizations, no distractions, just you and everything you carried. But even in that heavy, hollow place, I felt something else. A flicker, faint, barely there, like the first spark of a fire in the cold. Hope. I couldn't see its source. I couldn't touch it. But I knew it was there. Some part of me believed that this tunnel, as suffocating as it was, wasn't a final destination. It was a path, a passage. And the question was, what waited on the other side? I continued moving forward deeper into the fog, unsure of where I was going, but certain that I wasn't alone. The presence of others surrounded me, some watching, some trapped, some reaching for something they could no longer grasp. That was when I first sensed him, not a man, not a shadow, but a presence that stopped everything. The fog held its breath. The murmurs paused. Even my thoughts quieted. Someone was coming. And whatever it was, it knew me. The presence grew closer, not through space, but through certainty. There was no sound, no footsteps, but I felt him, whatever he was, drawing near with a gravity I couldn't resist. It wasn't fear I felt. It was reverence, like standing before something so ancient, so infinite, that your very soul forgets how to pretend. Then everything shifted. The tunnel faded behind me, as though it had completed its purpose. I was no longer surrounded by mist, but standing on the edge of a realm I struggle to describe. Imagine a place where form and feeling blend, where every shape hums with emotion and every color bleeds into memory. That's the closest I can get. It was a place not meant for human eyes, not because it was forbidden, but because we are too fragile to fully comprehend it. I stepped forward, or perhaps was pulled. The air here, if it could be called that, was saturated with anguish. Not pain as we know it, but a deeper ache, an ancient hollowness that echoed through eternity. Around me were structures that weren't buildings, more like impressions of despair carved into space itself. The walls wept sorrow, the ground pulsed with guilt, and the people, they weren't screaming, they weren't even crying. That might have been easier to witness. Instead, they simply were, each soul wrapped in its own invisible torment, silent yet thunderous. Their agony wasn't loud, it was profound, like an ache behind your ribs that never leaves. They drifted, wandered, collapsed in corners of this place, not chained, not tortured, but trapped within the raw truth of who they had become. There were no demons here, no fiery punishments or eternal damnation as the world imagines it, just consequence, just revelation. I walked, or moved, or existed deeper into that place, and with every step, my heart grew heavier. The souls I passed weren't strangers. They weren't villains, they weren't monsters. They were people I had known, people I had loved, people I had admired. There was Mr. Cole, my high school English teacher, who stayed after school every day to help students. I saw him, hunched over, holding an invisible book to his chest as if it were a shield. His eyes met mine, and in that brief moment, I felt everything. His secret bitterness, his lifelong anger, the quiet despair he had never spoken aloud. Further on, I saw Linda from my old church choir, always the loudest voice, always the first to lead prayer. But here she stood motionless, wrapped in a silence that felt like a scream turned inward. Her faith had been performative. Her words, though beautiful, had not matched the turmoil inside her. And then I saw my brother, not by blood, but in the ways that matter, my childhood best friend. We had drifted apart in our 20s after an argument we never repaired. There he was, sitting on the edge of what looked like a crumbling staircase, eyes fixed on nothing, lost in some eternal replay of guilt and pride. I wanted to call out to him, to say I was sorry, that it never should have ended the way it did, but I couldn't. Words don't work in that place. Only presence does, only truth. I understood then why we're not meant to see this place, not because it's terrifying, but because it strips away every illusion we cling to, every justification, every mask. This was a place of exposure, of reckoning, not from a judging God, but from our own unfiltered essence. We weren't punished here. We stood in the shadow of our choices. It was too much. I collapsed, or what felt like collapsing. My soul buckled under the weight. I felt myself fracturing, unraveling. If I stayed there any longer, I knew I would become one of them, another silent shape caught in the loops of unhealed wounds and unspoken regrets. That's when the light came. It wasn't a burst. It wasn't sudden. It was a whisper, a gentle glow piercing the atmosphere like a thread of gold through black cloth. It didn't blind. It didn't conquer the darkness. It simply was, unapologetically pure. And it was coming for me, not to punish, not to shame, but to call me out of that place because I had seen enough, and what I had seen would change me forever. The light didn't pull me out, not yet. It lingered at a distance, giving me a choice. I could feel it, waiting, not forcing, not commanding, just holding space, as if to say, if you still need to see, I will wait, but if your heart is ready, I will lead you home. And somehow I knew I wasn't done. Something inside me urged me to look again, not just at the place, but at the people, the souls. There were faces still hidden in the shadows of that sorrowful realm, stories still calling to be heard. And so I turned from the light, just slightly, and allowed myself to remain a little longer. That's when I saw him. My grandfather. He had died when I was 17. A quiet man, strong but gentle, the kind who fixed cars on Saturdays and prayed at the dinner table on Sundays. I remembered him as the most decent person I'd ever known. He was my moral compass growing up, a man of few words but deep conviction. And yet there he was, sitting alone, eyes closed, hands folded as if in prayer, but his lips didn't move. There was no peace in his posture, only heaviness. It didn't make sense. I moved closer, and as I did, I was given something I didn't ask for, but couldn't turn away from: knowledge. I saw his life, not just the surface I had known, but the hidden rooms of his soul. I saw the pain he carried from childhood, the abuse he had never spoken of, the resentment he buried beneath duty, the judgments he passed in silence, thinking them harmless, and worst of all, the shame he had swallowed every day for mistakes no one knew he made. He had been a good man in public, but in private, he had battled demons he never told a soul about. He hadn't confessed, he hadn't healed, and in that, he had shut the door on grace, not because it wasn't offered, but because he never believed he deserved it. That was the tragedy. He wasn't condemned. He was hiding, from love, from light, from himself, and still, the light waited. Nearby, I saw a young woman, barely out of her teens, rocking silently on what looked like a broken bench. Her eyes were vacant, staring through time. I didn't recognize her at first, but as I approached, my breath caught in my chest. It was Maria. She'd gone to school with my daughter. She died at 20 in a car accident. The whole town had mourned her. Beautiful, bright, full of life. Everyone spoke of her laughter, her kindness, the promise she carried. But here she was small, faded, a fragment of herself. And again, I was shown. She had lived under the crushing pressure of perfection. Behind every smile was a cry for help no one ever heard. Her soul wasn't here because of some final act, but because she had never known who she truly was. She had lived for others, for approval, for image, and in the absence of self-love, she had become lost, even after death. I wanted to reach for her, to scream that she wasn't alone, that she was loved, that the light was still waiting. But my voice was no use here. My presence, however, was. She looked at me, just for a moment, and a tear slipped down her cheek. And then I saw the last one. It was like looking into a mirror, not of my face, but of my soul. A version of me that never came back, one that remained in this realm, paralyzed by regret. I saw the pain I had caused others, the small cruelties, the careless moments, the years I lived asleep to love. This version of me had never been awakened, never been shown what I was now being shown. And I realized that could have been my eternity. That's when the light grew brighter, not because it had moved closer, but because I had finally turned toward it. These weren't just people I knew. They were parts of me, my judgments, my assumptions, my blindness to the pain of others. I had come here thinking hell was about punishment, but now I understood it's about awareness, about awakening, and about the unbearable cost of ignoring the quiet voice inside that begs us to love deeper, to forgive faster, to live more honestly. I looked back one last time and whispered, not with words but with my soul, I see you, I remember you, and I will carry your story with me. Then I turned, and the light received me. As the light enveloped me, I felt its warmth not just around me, but within me, filling the cracks I didn't know existed, healing wounds I hadn't acknowledged. But it wasn't a rescue. It was an invitation, a moment of stillness in which I was allowed to ask the one question that had burned through my soul since the beginning of all this. Why are they here? The faces, the souls, the people I had loved, respected, admired, even envied. Why were they in that place of sorrow, of silence, of unbearable truth? I didn't ask the question out loud. In that realm, there was no need for words. The question was a pulse, and the answer came like light unfolding into understanding, not in sentences, but in knowing. I was shown something then, not with my eyes but with my spirit, a memory that wasn't mine, and yet belonged to all of us. A great room, filled with light, long before time. Souls gathered, luminous and full of purpose. We had chosen to come here, to live on earth, to forget, to remember, to suffer and love and grow, each of us with a path, each of us with a fragile, holy gift, free will. And that was the beginning of the answer. They weren't in that place because they were evil, or because they had failed. They were there because they had forgotten who they were, forgotten how deeply they were loved, forgotten that they had the power to choose love, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. I saw my grandfather again, his soul trembling under the weight of old wounds he had never dared to face, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't believe healing was for him. I saw Maria, the young girl who lived for everyone but herself, staring at a version of her life she had never claimed, and I saw that mirrored version of me, standing in stillness, waiting for someone, anyone, to show him the way out. And then I was shown something even harder: choice. They were not trapped, not in the way we think of being trapped. The realm I had visited wasn't a prison. It was a reflection, a place of pause, a place between forgetting and remembering, between shame and grace. The doors were open, but walking through them required something that felt impossible for many: surrender, not to punishment, not to religion, but to love. And for some, that's the hardest thing to accept, that you are worthy, that you are loved, not for what you've done or haven't done, but simply because you are. And that's what kept them there. Not God, not angels, not some eternal sentence written in stone, but a wound so deep it convinced them they weren't welcome in the light. I wept then, not tears of sorrow but of recognition, because I had felt that too in my own life. The ache of not being enough, the fear of being seen fully, the temptation to hide behind pride or guilt or performance. How easy it is to smile in public and bleed in secret. How often we live behind masks we can't even name, and yet the light waited. For all of them, for all of us, patient, unmoving, endlessly open. And I knew I had been allowed to see this not because I was special, but because I was willing to carry it back, to remember, to tell, to live differently. This wasn't just about what happens when we die. It was about how we live while we're here. Every moment is a choice. Every act of kindness, every withheld judgment, every step toward forgiveness. It matters. It creates ripples that echo beyond the veil. And so when I asked again in the quiet of my soul, why are they here? The real answer was this: because love was always reaching for them, and they simply hadn't reached back. Not yet. The light that had been patiently waiting for me began to change. Not in color or form, it remained soft, radiant, almost alive, but in presence. It grew fuller, more intimate, not overwhelming but personal, like it knew me, like it always had. And then, from within it, came the voice. Not thunderous, not commanding, but clear, steady, warm in a way that melted everything hard inside me. It wasn't male or female. It wasn't in English. It wasn't even made of sound, but I understood every word, not with my ears, but with my being. It said my name, not just the one I had been given at birth, but the name of my soul, the name only heaven knew. And hearing it, feeling it, was like coming home after a long, long exile. I fell to my knees, or at least it felt like I did, though I no longer had a body in the way we understand bodies, but the posture of surrender was real. My soul folded in awe, not fear, not shame, but pure, reverent love. I was not in the presence of judgment. I was in the presence of origin, of truth, and the voice spoke again. You are not here to be condemned. That sentence, it didn't just calm me, it shattered me. Everything I had carried, every secret sorrow, every buried guilt, every spiritual bruise I thought disqualified me from grace, was illuminated in that moment, not to shame me, but to heal me. I had been carrying a burden I was never meant to carry alone, and so many others were doing the same. Then the voice showed me what I'd asked to understand, not just the why of what I had seen, but the how we fall so far from the light. How ordinary lives, good lives, can end in spiritual isolation. I was shown threads of choice, threads of pain, tiny, imperceptible fractures that grow when left untended, a harsh word that goes unhealed, a childhood wound that festers into silence, a betrayal never addressed, pride mistaken for strength, guilt mistaken for truth. Each thread so small, but when tangled, they become a net, pulling souls into shadow. And still, the voice said, even then I do not stop calling. I was stunned. You call to them? Still, even now. The voice didn't answer with words this time. Instead, I was shown the moments, tiny, quiet moments, where that call was made. A flicker of peace before sleep, a stranger's kindness in the middle of despair, a song that touches something hidden, a memory that reawakens tenderness, a dream that feels like more than a dream. These are not accidents. These are the voice, whispers in the darkness, always reaching, always present. And I saw how many ignore it, not out of defiance, but out of pain. They believe they are too far gone, too broken, too unworthy, but the voice never gives up, because the voice is not a thing. It is love itself, unyielding, gentle, fearless, and it was speaking to me now, not just to comfort me, but to commission me. You have seen what many are afraid to see, but do not carry fear back with you. Carry compassion, carry remembrance. And then it said something I will never forget. No soul is ever lost, only waiting to be found. That single truth shook me more than anything else I had experienced, because I knew now, hell is not separation enforced by God. It is separation believed by the soul, a prison of the heart with doors wide open. And the key is remembering the voice that never stops speaking, never stops calling, even in the deepest dark, even when we think no one can hear us, even when we forget how to listen, because love, true love, waits, forever if it must. There was a moment, still infinite, when I thought I would stay, not because I had earned it, not because I felt worthy, but because I didn't want to leave that presence, that voice, that light. After what I had seen, after what I had felt, how could I go back to the world I came from? A world of pain, noise, confusion, forgetfulness. But the light moved, not away, not closer. It shifted, gently but with certainty, and I understood. My time here was ending. I wanted to plead, to stay longer, to ask for more, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. My soul already knew the answer. The return wasn't punishment. It was purpose. There was something I needed to carry back, something I had seen, about truth, about grace, about the thin veil between life and eternity, about how many live in quiet suffering, unaware of the love still calling to them, about how many believe they are alone. I had to return, not as a prophet, not as a hero, but simply as a witness, because once you've seen what lies beyond the veil, you can no longer pretend this world is all there is. And so, the return began. It was not dramatic. There was no flash, no tearing sound, no resistance. It was like being slowly unwrapped from light, gently lowered from a great height, like a feather caught in a slow descent. The warmth receded, but never fully disappeared. A thread remained, connecting me to that place, to that presence. Then came the heaviness, my body. I felt it before I saw it. The weight of physical existence, the ache in my chest, the stiffness in my limbs, my heart beating like a distant drum, calling me back to a place that no longer felt like home. My eyes opened slowly, hospital lights, monitors, the beeping of machines, a nurse adjusting something near my bed, the cold air on my skin, the dissonance of returning, and then grief. Not for having died, but for having left. I wept, not from fear, not from pain, but from longing. I had touched something eternal. I had stood in the presence of the very essence of love. And now I was back in a world that had forgotten what that love feels like. The doctors called it a miracle. My heart had stopped. My vitals were gone for minutes that stretched too long. They used words like resuscitation, anomalous recovery, trauma-induced hallucination. But none of their explanations reached me. They spoke to my body. But my soul had seen more than they could ever measure. My family rejoiced. Friends cried. Strangers sent flowers. I smiled. I held their hands. I said the right words. But inside, I was changed. There was a silence inside me now, not empty, but vast. A space I had never known before. A place where memories of that realm echoed. Faces I couldn't forget. Souls I had witnessed. A voice that still whispered when the world was quiet. For days I could barely speak of it. I tried once or twice, but language felt too small. How could I explain a place beyond emotion, beyond time? How could I describe pain that wasn't punishment, love that wasn't earned, truth that didn't judge? So, I sat with it, and I listened, and slowly I realized I hadn't come back just to live. I had come back to remember, to live differently, to see people differently, to recognize the invisible pain others carry, the masks they wear, the weight they don't speak of, because I had seen where that pain leads, if left in silence. I had seen what it looks like when love is rejected, not because it's not offered, but because we don't believe we deserve it. And I had seen the light that still waits for them, for us. I didn't ask to return. But now that I'm here, I know this life, this fleeting, fragile, beautiful life, is not just a test or a punishment or a meaningless accident. It is a chance to remember who we really are, a chance to choose love while we still can. They say people change after a near-death experience, that their priorities shift, that they speak differently, look at the world with new eyes. I used to think it was just a way of coping, some psychological reaction to the trauma of almost dying. But for me, it wasn't a reaction. It was a rebirth. From the moment I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, nothing looked the same. The colors were richer. The silence had depth. The people around me radiated with something I hadn't noticed before. Light, pain, hope, confusion, all swirling beneath the surface. I could see it in their eyes, feel it in their presence. The world hadn't changed. I had. And with that change came a kind of grief I hadn't expected. Not just for what I had left behind in that realm of light, but for all the years I had wasted here. All the conversations I hadn't listened to. All the moments I had rushed through. All the people I had looked at without truly seeing. I remember the first time I walked outside after leaving the hospital. The wind brushed against my skin like a whisper from the other side. The sky stretched above me, vast and infinite, not just as a canvas of blue, but as a veil, thin, fragile, temporary. And I knew with every breath we're just passing through. But that doesn't mean this life is meaningless. It means it's sacred. And so I began to live differently. Not by trying to be better, but by being more present. I listened more. I forgave faster. I stopped hiding behind certainty. I allowed myself to cry without shame. I let people see me, truly see me, for the first time in years, because I no longer feared vulnerability. I feared forgetting what I had seen, forgetting the souls still wandering in their own inner shadows, alive yet disconnected, walking through life with wounds so old they had become invisible. So I paid attention to the lonely woman at the grocery store who just wanted someone to ask how she was, to the man at the gas station whose eyes were empty but whose soul still had a spark, to my children when they told me stories I would have once brushed off, to my spouse when silence hung heavier than any words. These weren't just moments anymore. They were opportunities to love deeper, to reach further, to pull someone else even 1 inch closer to the light. And then there were the dreams. They didn't stop. Even months after the experience, I would wake in the night, heart pounding, with images still fresh in my mind. Not nightmares, but visits, reminders, echoes of that place. Sometimes I'd see the faces again. Maria, my grandfather, the mirror version of myself, not in torment, but in transition, always surrounded by a sense of movement, as if something in them was shifting, healing, remembering. And I prayed, not in the way I used to, not begging, not bargaining, but being, resting in stillness, holding them in my heart, trusting that the light I had seen still called to them, and to everyone. I no longer saw faith as a set of rules or beliefs to defend. I saw it as a bridge between this life and the next, between pain and purpose, between who we pretend to be and who we truly are. There were people who distanced themselves from me. Some called me delusional. Others listened politely but changed the subject quickly. I didn't blame them. If I hadn't lived it, I might not have believed it either. But I knew what I had seen, and more importantly, I knew what I had felt, and that knowing carried me through dark nights, through moments of doubt, through days when the weight of this world felt too heavy, because I now carried a light that nothing here could extinguish. Life never went back to normal, but I wouldn't want it to. I had touched eternity, and it had touched me back. If you're hearing this, it means you're still on this side, still breathing, still walking your path, still trying to make sense of a world that can feel so heavy, so confusing, so impossibly fragile at times. I understand, because I've walked with sorrow too. I've lost people I love. I've said words I can't take back. I've stood at gravesides wondering if I would ever feel whole again. And now, having crossed that veil, even for a moment, I carry with me a truth that has reshaped everything. This life is not all there is. There is more. Not just after death, but surrounding us, whispering in the quiet, moving through the spaces we think are empty. I didn't come back with a doctrine. I didn't come back with a religion. I came back with a knowing, a remembering, that beneath all our fear and striving and noise, we are already known, already seen, already loved, and none of us are ever truly alone. To the grieving mother who wonders if her child is safe, he is. To the widow who sleeps on only one side of the bed now, he's closer than you think. To the daughter who didn't make it to the hospital in time, he knows you tried, and he forgives you. To the man who carries guilt like a second skin, there is nothing you've done that love cannot touch. I saw people in that other realm who surprised me, not because they were evil, but because they were wounded, and they had hidden those wounds for so long, even from themselves, that they began to believe the lie, that they didn't deserve the light, that their story had ended in shame, that their window had closed. But I'm here to tell you, it hasn't. Not for them, not for you. The love I encountered, what I call the voice, the presence, the light, it doesn't operate by our rules. It doesn't keep score the way we do. It doesn't wait for perfection, it just waits, with patience deeper than time, with a tenderness that doesn't shame, but gently unveils. All of us carry pain, all of us fall short, and still the light calls. And one day, when your time comes, and it will, you won't face judgment in the way you might fear. You'll face truth, and it will not come with wrath, it will come with tears, with memories, with moments you thought were small but shaped the course of your soul. And even then you'll be held. Even then the voice will speak. You are mine. I've been with you the whole time. Until that day, let your life be a doorway, not just to survival, but to remembering. Be kind even when it's inconvenient. Forgive, even when it still hurts. Speak gently to your own heart. And when you feel lost, when the weight is too much, when the world feels cold and quiet, pause, breathe, and listen. The voice is still there, and it's calling you home. Not someday, now, in every heartbeat, in every sunrise, in every chance to love again, because the truth is, and always has been, this: the love that waits on the other side has already begun here. Discover how to unlock your prophetic destiny, activate spiritual gifts, and impact your sphere of influence with the power of the kingdom. Don't miss this transformative opportunity. Click the link in the video description to learn more.